And I believe that Mr. Nunes would like to inquire at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think with the current numbers on this committee now, we should probably move to final passage of this bill.
Great.
What do you think?
Without objection.
I don't think you have enough of your Democrats here yet, Mr. Stark. You might fail. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Elmendorf, you've already heard the this question several times, so I won't restate it, but I will state it's hard for me to believe that you know how many people this bill will cover, but you don't know what the bill will cost. I just find that hard to believe, and I'm a little disappointed with CBO not being able to tell us what this bill costs at this point.
So Congressman, just to be clear, we've given you our preliminary estimate of the cost of the coverage provisions and the effect of the coverage provisions on insurance coverage. I too am disappointed that we have not yet produced a complete estimate of the bill, but as you understand, it is a complicated bill, and it takes time for us to work on.
Well, and that leads me to another frustration that I have with this committee, is that there are amendments filed in the middle of the night. No one's had a chance really to read this bill at this point, and I would hope that we would. It's unfortunate that we couldn't postpone this for another week before we mark this bill up, because maybe we would have more accurate information from CBO. Is it correct to say that this bill expands Medicaid?
Yes.
Has anyone on this panel ever been on Medicaid before?
I have not, Congressman. Can't speak for others.
I'm just trying to figure out, and I've asked this question before in this committee, I just can't understand why we're not trying to fix Medicaid and fix the long-term liability problems that we have in Medicare before we go into this huge new expansion of basically government-mandated and funded health care coverage in this country. Mr. Elmendorf, what are the estimated unfunded liabilities of Medicaid today?
Don't have a dollar figure for that in my head, Congressman, but I was testifying this morning about our long-term budget outlook, and certainly we highlight one of the key elements of unsustainability in the U.S. fiscal outlook, the rising costs for Medicaid. Medicaid and Medicare together are a very large share of the long-run problem, and as I said this morning in my testimony, the central fiscal challenge facing the country.
And it's probably safe to say, though, that the unfunded liabilities of Medicaid and Medicare are well into the trillions.
Oh, yes.
Probably tens of trillions.
Let me answer the questions. The liabilities are very large. The unfundedness is a complicated business. As you know, part of Medicare has a trust fund, as does Social Security. Part of Medicare is not funded through a trust fund. Medicaid is not funded through a trust fund. So what's funded and unfunded is much less clear. But the prospective liabilities under current law are very large.
Are very large. And I guess you can tell my frustration that we're moving forward with a big health care package. I think we all agree that health care has to be fixed. But by taking money from Medicare at this point, when it has a whole host of problems, not just solvency, has problems with delivery of good services under Medicare, and then pushing more people to Medicaid at a time, at least in my district, the people that are on Medicaid don't like being on Medicaid and would prefer to have other alternatives. We spend about $11,000 a person on Medicaid right now. Is that accurate in this country?
I don't know the answer to that question. Like I say, Congressman, I'm not sure what you mean by pushing people onto Medicaid. As I understand the legislation, it expands eligibility for Medicaid for people who are not currently eligible.
Right, but the bottom line is we're going to
choice, and we, in fact, in our estimate, don't think all of them will take that. But
we're going to end up with more.
Whether they take up Medicaid.
We're going to end up with more people on Medicaid.
Yes.
And you know, my problem with that is that I would rather see the people that are on Medicaid now not have second-class health care. I would rather see them have an option, like a voucher of some kind, to where they could take, because right now I think it's about $11,000 we spend on Medicaid. Seems like that would be a heck of a lot more efficient way to deliver health care, to let people choose their own health care at some point.
I mean, in fact,
and let me, I think my time is getting short here, so I want to ask another question. If we're going to have this 8% payroll tax on to employers that do not provide health care. What happens to the business today that perhaps is spending up to 15% on health care that then decides to drop that health care and go to 8%? They'd rather pay 8% instead of 15%.
So I think that's an important question, Congressman. I'll let my colleague Phil Ellis talk about the way we've modeled the incentives for employers and workers to take up different health care options.
So let me just try to illustrate that with a relatively straightforward example. So take a worker, single worker who makes $50,000 a year. If you look at, and let's say their policy costs, $5,000, so it's 10% of their income. Maybe that's a little bit on the lower end. So if you look at the if the employer offers coverage, they get the subsidy from the tax exclusion from that. That's right, not treated as taxable income, which is about 30% of the premium. So if on a $5,000 premium, that's about a $1,500 subsidy. If you add to that the cost of the penalty they'd have to pay if the employer decides not to offer coverage, 8% of $50,000 is about $4,000. So it's really sort of between the two of those, it would be they'd be giving up a subsidy that they're getting from the tax exclusion and paying a big penalty and still having to go get insurance. So it's almost, I mean, sort of the combination of the $4,000 and the $1,500 is really more than the policy would cost. And then even if they go into the exchange, they're not going to get 100% premium subsidy there. So obviously the situation would vary. Employers with lower wage workers, the penalty would be smaller, the advantage in the exchange would be bigger, and we've tried to take that all into account. And we do think some employers who would be offering coverage under current law would not do so under the proposal because their employees could benefit from going into the exchange, but it is a substantial penalty, and we do think that plays an important role in keeping people in their employer plan.
But we will have more people that are going to go on to into this government plan of some kind, which I think is very scary at this point, dealing with, if we just look at how Medicaid and Medicare are today and how inefficient they are, it seemed like we would deal with those problems first. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving me a little extended time. I congratulate you on the boldness of your approach. You never cease to amaze me, but I'm very troubled by this legislation, and I would hope we'd take more time before we pass this bill today.
Well, I'd be glad to entertain whatever recommendations you may have to remedy this very serious national problem.